how's it going, man?
I should be asking you guys this question. I hope it's going well for you guys because I'm just not sure how it's going for the Mavericks at this point. And you know I root for the Mavericks. I like Luka and I like J. Kidd. So are you guys doing okay?
We're nervous, very nervous.
We're going to have to.
It's like, isn't it like you're not marrying this girl with no prenup, right?
Yes, exactly.
He's kind of asking for no prenup here. I'm not sure I'm doing that.
I think we might spend most of the segment then asking each other questions because I'm looking at our texts and half the people are like, oh my gosh, he's amazingly talented. True. This is the best player Luka's played with by a mile. And then the other half are, what's the expiration date? Let's burn it all to the ground.
This is the best second player that's played in Dallas since Nash.
Oh, I could see that.
Okay.
And I inherently think Kyrie Irving is more talented than Steve Nash. Like, I realize not meant to be a shot at Steve Nash, but do you view this with a shelf life?
Those two guys get along, so it's fine. Nash and Kyrie are good.
Do you view this as inherently having a shelf life since I guess that's kind of been one of the MOs for Kyrie's career?
I'm actually first of all, I know that Jason Kidd is a miracle worker. He made me an 11-year NBA player. He does amazing things with people, right? So I can see why in his mind he can make this work, right? But in the basketball world where you need length, you need defense, you need shooting, you need players that can play on the ball, off the ball, and all that. And maybe they think, like, we have enough of that. We have enough two-way guys to center around these two. But typically, I just don't know if in the playoffs this thing is going to work because how are these guys not going to get exposed on the defensive end? And if you had an amazing, crazy rim protector, I'd say fine. Christian Wood at times has been okay, maybe a little bit better than that. But defensively, I just don't see how – like this group is going to work hard enough defensively, or those two guys in particular are going to work hard enough defensively that's going to allow you to win what I would consider go to the finals, go to the Western Conference, go to the Western Conference Finals. I feel like that's going to be really tough. And one of my favorite players on the Mavs, you guys traded away. Like I thought Dorian Finney-Smith was like, you could name, I guess, 30 teams in the NBA and they would all want Dorian Finney-Smith.
Would they want him as their number two, though?
I don't think that matters as much anymore.
Okay.
I know that it's like NBA goes in trends, and the Warriors won last year without having a number two. Who the hell was their number two? Klay Thompson was just coming back. Jordan Poole was up and down. Like I get it, those guys were accomplished, but Steph Curry was amazing. You guys, I'm a big fan of Jalen Brunson, but when you watch the Dallas Mavericks beat the Phoenix Suns, you didn't necessarily have a number two guy out there, and you still got to the conference finals. So, with a guy like Luka who holds the ball so much, I'm not sure it's necessary to have a number two if, let's keep it real. If Luka gets hurt during the playoffs, you're not going to win. And if Luka he can't play for 42 minutes and dominate, you're not going to win. So what is the point of having a number two? I'd rather have multiple guys who can defend, stretch the defense, move the ball, do it by committee. I mean, the reality is you guys lost what I consider probably the perfect player in Jalen Brunson. And, I don't know if Dallas is going to ever be able to make up for that mistake.
Let's Brian Scalabrine joining us right now. Brian, let's just kind of look at maybe, because we're having to do this too. We go back and forth on this. Let's try to look at the optimistic side, Brian. If you were to look at the optimistic side, maybe what Nico Harrison, what Michael Finley, what Mark Cuban, and Jason Kidd kind of thought on, we are going to do this because the upside is what?
Yeah, so the upside is keeping Kyrie Irving on a 1-year deal. He's been absolutely amazing these last 2 months. I mean, when I say amazing, he did a 180. And NBA players, usually they don't do a 180, but when it comes to playing all the time and committing and even his defense at times has been a lot better. So optimistically, if Kyrie Irving obviously has a ton to prove, and the reason why he wanted out of Brooklyn is because they wouldn't give him a 4-year, $200 million extension off of 2 good months. Like he played good basketball for 2 months, played all the time and was great. And he wanted $200 million for that. So if I'm the Mavs I'm looking at optimistically. You got Kyrie Irving on his best behavior. So if you take that and you add it to Luka and you add like the romance period, like the very initial part of this, and each player is willing to sacrifice and for one another. So that's what it's going to take for Luka and Kyrie. Like they're both going to have to make concessions to their game. And you can find a way to defend the rim and, and have enough defensive players out there to hold, the Kawhi Leonards, Paul George, the Murrays, the Jokic, and all those guys down, then there's your optimistically thinking with the West being wide open. So, but even if you guys do well, would you guys still think, okay, let's give Kyrie Irving 4 years, $200 million, knowing that it could be the end of Luka Doncic somewhere down the road? So optimistically this year, and if you keep Kyrie Irving on one-year deals and he's amazing like he has been the last 2 months, then there is a chance, especially this year.
And when you say optimistically, it feels like you're like, but seriously, I don't think some of that stuff's going to happen, which I do get. I was curious, obviously media folks talk a lot about perception and reality and everything. How prevalent is that in the NBA where will people be like, hey, Kyrie's going to ditch this team eventually? Like how much does that kind of gossip or whatever go across the players in the league?
I think they talk about that kind of stuff, but I think they're really kind of self-focused on their own team and whatever Kyrie Irving does, like he does it. Here's a side of this that I wasn't really thinking about until probably this morning. I know Mark Cuban's not stupid, and there has to be a sign and trade opportunity if this thing were to go south. Because remember, he made the Rondo deal, and he was like, man, that just didn't work out for the Mavs. So he had to say, like, okay, we've been through something like this before. This offseason could be an interesting time to kind of upgrade, I guess, upgrade Spencer Dinwiddie. Maybe right now it seems like there are a lot of people that are interested in Kyrie. Let's say Kyrie plays extremely well because it's a contract year and he wants to. There could be some people that are interested in a sign and trade, but you just got to find the right people, a couple, working in a few teams there and figuring that out. So optimistically, I would say Cuban has to think, well, if it doesn't work, I always, because of the cap situation that the Mavs are in, they could probably move on Kyrie and maybe upgrade their team in a different way than what they had with Dinwiddie and Dorian Finney-Smith.
So, Brian, what we heard is kind of that Luka did say, let's do this, that they ran it by him and he said, yes, I want Kyrie, even though I believe Dorian Finney-Smith was his best friend on the team. I'll ask you, do you think they ran this by Durant? It seems like they didn't. I don't know if Durant in the next 24 hours says, I'm not playing basketball anymore. Like, can you give us the idea on where kind of Brooklyn is and then how tough it is maybe for a superstar to say, yeah, trade a couple of the guys that I really like for this better player?
Yeah. So for the Luka thing first, it seems like a lot of people believe that you can, talent is what wins. And you can work through all the other stuff. So I'm sure he believes that. And I believe, Luka in his mind, who probably will eventually miss Dorian Finney-Smith because, defensively, I love that guy, right? So if I'm Kevin Durant, I played against Finney-Smith. I have, from that standpoint, you have to think, well, with Kyrie Irving, it's been nothing but problems. Kyrie Irving played in 4 years with the Nets. He played in 52% of the games. Just think about that. If you went to work 52% of the time, and then you went to your boss and said, I want another 4-year contract, you would have to be on some kind of world, flat earth type of world to even ask for something like that. So I wonder if Kevin Durant is maybe a little tired of it. And I will say this, I personally, depend on what they do with Spencer Dinwiddie, depending on what they do with Dallas's 2029 pick in the second round, I really think that the Brooklyn Nets are going to be active in the next, all the way up until Thursday, and they could end up making another move like an OG Anunoby or something like that. So if Kevin Durant and a bunch of long, athletic, tough guys, I would take that team over what I had with Kevin Durant and Kyrie. So maybe, I never know what Kevin Durant's thinking, but maybe he's optimistic about it. For Luka, I think he's optimistically thinking that talent is the overall end-all, be-all, which I'm not sure it is. I've seen Kyrie in Boston. I've seen Kyrie in Brooklyn. I mean, I've seen him in Cleveland. I know he won a championship, but at the end, it was pretty disastrous, and you heard some of the stories. I wonder at the end of this whole thing what it's going to be like with Kyrie in Dallas.
Brian Scalabrine joined us here on the K&C Masterpiece on 105.3 The Fan. Mike was on Real GM or GM Generator or something like that last night, and we got Pascal Siakam in a trade.
Yes!
Is that the next step for this team? They add Siakam, they have Kyrie and Luka, and is that a championship?
Hell yeah.
Well, what were you giving up? Christian Wood?
Yeah, it doesn't work. Don't worry. Brian.
Well, more than anything, like, do the Mavs have another move they should make that you would like them to see?
Yeah, I would try to get Dorian Finney-Smith.
No, that's what we just said away.
He would be. No, I just think, unless I'm missing something, you have to have defensive players to win in the playoffs. Look at the teams that win. They have guys like that. Even the Warriors last year, I know you probably don't think of those guys, but Andrew Wiggins, they're not winning that series without Wiggins out there. You have to have two-way players that can knock down shots and defend at a high clip. The ball skills of players nowadays are so off the charts. They're so sophisticated in the way that they get contact. If you can't defend, move your feet with length, players are too good. They'll just shoot right over you. So I would think maybe Pascal Siakam is amazing. OG Anunoby would probably be a better fit because he's a beast down there. He can really guard. So I'd be looking at more players like that to surround with Luka. And if you were going to give up Christian Wood for somebody, then just be big across the board. Kyrie, and Luka's obviously a pretty big guy, 6'9" and above. And maybe you can figure out some different ways to switch and rebound at a high enough clip. As much as the NBA has talked about with the skilled players, it still comes down to defending the paint, defending the restricted area, and rebounding the basketball. If you can't do those things, you will not win. So when you guys right, we got Kyrie and he's talented, that's great. There's no doubt that he is. But it always comes down to paint, restricted area, and rebounding the ball. So if they don't do that, they're not going to win. I don't care how good those two are.
So, Brian, you mentioned Christian Wood a few times. I know that the Mavs are trying to trade him. The Mavs fans really like Christian Wood. We've liked what he's brought to the table as a Maverick, but we understand the coaching staff isn't crazy about his defense and other things. What do you hear around the league about Christian Wood and what he could bring back in a trade?
So I think that a good word to describe, I heard he works really hard. I heard he studies film. So hard work used to be a good term that people used. But I think the term that you want to use is, does he have enough grit to win a championship? That's when you think about it and you think about teams and they have these guys on their team, think about is he gritty enough to win a championship? Is he gritty enough to play alongside Luka? And guys like that Luka can take 30 shots in a game. He's not going to pout about it, but he's going to defend. He's going to do this. He's going to do that. He's going to make big shots. He's going to make big plays. He's going to dive on the floor. Does he have enough grit? So I don't think the NBA stamps Christian Wood as a guy who has enough grit to win a championship, but he's a good enough player, but he's not a difference maker. So I don't know if the Mavs feel the same way. Maybe the coaching staff does. Maybe the front office does. But I would use the grit test from here on out with Kyrie and Luka. Outside of those guys, which I think Luka has a lot of grit. I'm a huge fan of Luka, but if they don't match up to that grit, that toughness, you're not going to beat Jokic. You're not going to beat those guys. You're probably not going to beat the healthy Clippers. There's some pretty good teams out there. Maybe you'll be Sacramento, and those the West is kind of open, but you got to have some serious grit to beat to be in a championship conversation alongside Kyrie and Luka, and I'm not sure Christian Wood has that.
Last thing I was curious about, especially since you just mentioned it, do you think it's Denver and the rest of the West? Do you put Memphis in that group? Do you potentially put the Clippers in that group? How do you structure that?
Memphis has been struggling lately, and they got all these problems. Like you heard the story about John Moran and the laser.
Yep.
I'm like, I don't know what's going on over there, but when they're healthy, like Steven Adams is out. It's amazing when you start losing games how like all these problems start to occur. And like I told you before, like no one mentions Steven Adams being out because they're always talking about the skill players, but it comes down to defending the paint, defending the restricted area, and rebounding the basketball. And when Steven Adams is there, they win. So if they're healthy, I would put them in that conversation. I don't know what to make of the Warriors. You saw the Steph Curry injury, so I don't know. He could be out for a long time. I have no idea. I know this. Last year, that team had a lot of grit. Their whole thing was the haters are hating on us. Watch us. Like now they won a championship and they don't look anything like the same team they were last year. So I would say, and maybe even the Pelicans. I'm not sure when Zion's coming back.
Or for how long? Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, so a lot of that has to do with injuries and stuff like that. But if everyone is healthy, I got Denver, Memphis, Clippers, Pelicans, and then probably Golden State, Sacramento, rounding out. Obviously, Dallas, if they make some, different moves. That's kind of how I round out the West.